Today we're talking about the top 5 junglers in Smite. Now this won't be heavily opinion based because we actually have a lot of factual stats from the recent split from Masters from the SPL. But a few things have changed since. There were a few buffs, a few nerfs that we have to factor in, so a little bit of it will obviously still contain a certain level of bias. Overall, however, this should be a very statistics-based evaluation of the power of certain guards in the jungle, and that's what we're going with. While patch 4.8 isn't out yet, we will factor in the changes that come up in this patch and how they affect the meta. What we'll not be factoring in are the changes that come in patch 4.9 regarding the different level 1, level 2 curve and the maybe change jungle start through that, because that may shake up the meta entirely, and that's a whole different thing that we can look at then. Let's first take a quick look at the 5 junglers that were most successfully played at the Masters of the Spring Split. All these guards were around similar win rates, bouncing a little bit up and down depending on who played them and where in which matchup, but overall they all performed very, very well, and there are only mild nuances in their performance as to who is higher than the other, but we'll name them all in an order that makes sense. Number 5 would be Nemesis. Nemesis has been seeing a lot more play recently. She has shown that she can perform with her new buff that allows her to use basic attacks and abilities between her dashes, and is overall a very strong character in the current meta. Also, obviously, always has that potential of her ultimate. The only thing she suffers from a little bit is the early game clear. Susanoo is in place number 4. Susanoo, overall a very strong character. At the point of the Master Split, his nerf was not in place yet, so he had a little different potential, a little more potential with his attack cancels, and just gets that teamfight control, gets that quick damage off. That really helps him, and is therefore always a threat, and it's really, really hard to kill. Place 3 goes to Saket. Saket just showed what she was capable of in Masters. She has been very strong ever since her buff, and has already been a bit of a sleeper pick beforehand when she was introduced into Season 4 with that Bluestone plus Bamba's Mask start, which allowed her to get a lot more aggression going than she already had in the early game. So that all kind of came together for Saket. Place 2 goes to Hunbats. Hunbats has been performing very well in the Spring Split, just bringing out this whole control that led to him often being banned because his ultimate just changes so much in teamfights, and he's otherwise not weak either. Place number 1 goes to Raven. Now Raven and the Spring Split just dominated completely since his buff that allowed him to use his ultimate a lot more freely in many different ways, with that extra damage on the target and with the damage mitigation for himself, along with the high potential to go Sunder as the first relic due to the fact that he kind of has a built-in mix of Aegis and Beats depending on how you use it in his 2. And Sunder, just being a overall very strong item, obviously pushed him in that direction as well. Now, before we get into the top 5 junglers, let's quickly talk about the junglers that I think are really close to it, but didn't quite make it. The first one is Mercury. Now, Mercury has a lot of potential. Not much has changed about him lately, but Rage has changed. Now, Mercury, as I have shown you in the numbers, is not necessarily the ideal character to rush Rage on, but you can still make very good use of it, and this may affect his place in the meta if you go for some sort of triple crit build or something like that. So that's pretty important for him, that's pretty relevant for him, and as such, I can see him climbing up, especially with some other characters dropping down a little bit. The next one is Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong is obviously a little bit of an awkward pick in the jungle that we have not seen much and not in a long time, but Sun Wukong is receiving major damage buffs this upcoming patch. Now, somebody else received major buffs, and that was Raven recently, and that pushed him as a jungle warrior. So I could theoretically imagine something similar happening for Sun Wukong, because his jungle was never terrible, and with more power or more power scaling, it's always nice to be able to go into the jungle role where you are more flexible in your build than you would be in solo, where you're typically looking for more defense stats than power stats. If this is really happening is a question of how well he plays after the buff. However, it's worth pointing out that Shogun's Kusari got buffed. And that is something that may not only affect him, but a few other warriors that could theoretically jungle as well. This is also something that could help Raven, because of how this item works now. It has cooldown reduction still, it has magical defense, it has MP5, it has the CCR, but it also has a lot of attack speed now. And not every warrior makes equal use of attack speed, so Sun Wukong, for example, is not a prime user of this, but he can still benefit from the CDR and the MP5 and the defense. And we will really have to see how this item settles into the meta, and if jungle warriors could potentially make use of it. Unlikely, but possible. The next one is Cabrakan. Cabrakan has always been up there as a potential jungle pick, was very much picked early in the split, then kinda moved back into the solo role a little more, and it hasn't been seen that much. He received a slight nerf, and that may affect his performance a little bit in the jungle as well, taking away some of that early pressure that he has, and as such, I do not think that he currently belongs in the top 5 junglers, though he is really close. Another character to keep an eye on is Nigel. Nigel recently got a buff with his ring toss having an extra bounce on every level. I do think this is quite an impactful buff because it gives him so much early clear and early aggression, and he already had a lot of that, and it really can't be overstated. The downside to Nigel is and will always be the fact that he doesn't really have good escape tools, and his only real escape dash is in his ultimate, which can be blocked, and also is his main damage tool, which you want to use on a target. So Nigel, you know, he could be really, really good, and maybe this buff is what catapults him there, and in the right hands he will be very, very scary. But at the same time, he is single target focused, and he always has this downside that most other junglers don't have. And as such, I'm not quite sure if this is enough to push him into the top 5. The last one worth mentioning is a dropout, and that's Hunbatz. Hunbatz was very, very good, and Hunbatz is still not terrible, but that nerf to his ultimate, which means that it has an extra 10 seconds cooldown, is very impactful. Now, 10 seconds doesn't sound like much, but you have to A, keep in mind that his 1 was nerfed in addition, the slow was nerfed, and B, the ultimate is basically everything Hunbatz has and needs and uses. You want to play around that ultimate with Hunbatz. Your 2 does a lot of damage, your 3 allows for some nice plays, but the ult is what really sets you apart, and this extra 10 seconds often mean that you can't get the ult off exactly when you want it for the next fight, and that just sucks. And as many other junglers have a lot of control as well, you know, it's just not quite enough. Honorable mention goes to Thor as well. Thor is never a bad pick. He might potentially come back into the top 5 because he's never underpicked really, but at the same time I think other junglers are just better than him at the moment. And that finally brings us to the top 5 junglers. I will point out that there will always be builds for them at the bottom. These are very core builds that you should adjust depending on the situation, but especially in case of number 5, builds can vary a lot. Depending on how you want to play this character, you can build completely different from the proposed build on here. It's just one of the many ideas or one of the many options that exists. Number 5 is the most debatable one of them all, and it's Morrigan. Now Morrigan has seen some play in the SPL and she has performed decently there, but she wasn't necessarily always played in jungle. Morrigan has actually seen plenty of play across many, many roles. I do think that she has potential in jungle along other roles though. We have still not seen the full potential of this character. We've seen more and more of it with high-level players picking her up and playing her to some extent, but I do think that it is really hard to really get everything out of her that you can, and we will have yet to see that, but she is definitely showing that she's a very strong pick, and you can't really tell what she does because depending on who you turn into, she will have a completely different function in a fight, and that alone just gives her that leverage over many other characters. What I propose here is a more tanky build to have some more sustain in team fights, some more survivability in order to get your abilities up more often, but you can also go many, many other ways. The next one is Susanoo. Now Susanoo got a nerf to his damage in regards to Hydra's Lament, but that doesn't mean that he's out of the meta. He has the same potential as before other than this little bit of minus damage on attack cancelling, and that still brings a lot to the table. You can build Jolton's Wrath and just go a little more ability focused and you will be just fine. So really there's not too much of an issue for him with this nerf. I did originally think it would impact him quite a lot, but really it doesn't do that much harm to him. And with some other characters dropping off more, it doesn't really change anything in where he stands. The next one is actually also not changed from the SPL, and this is Saket. Saket received the nerf, but honestly, the nerf wasn't that major. Her passive still has the same damage if you land 3 poisons, which you should try most of the time, and her ult still has almost the same damage. Depending on the rank, it will have a little less tick damage, but it should not be that relevant that it hit her hard enough to kick her out of the meta or anything. As such, I do not believe that Saket is really going to fall off at all, and she's just going to stay where she currently is. Who does climb up a fair bit, in my opinion, is Nemesis. The reason for this is quite simple. Different from the others who received minor nerfs, Nemesis didn't receive any nerfs at all. She is just in the same place as she was before, and that kind of pushes her up because that place means she's a little higher now compared to others that sank a little lower in regards to their stats. And Nemesis just brings so much to the table in the current meta that I really believe she does have that potential to stay up there. She is one of the few characters who can actually compete with something like a warrior jungler because they will just lose the protections if they fight against her. And the buff that she got for her dash is just huge, as pointed out before. Please note that Nemesis can also go for completely different builds that are more focused around attack cancelling with crit and stuff included. I do not recommend this for people who are just looking for a very simple, straightforward beginner build for her. That's why I'm not including this here. If you know more about how to play the character, then you will figure out those builds yourself and you shouldn't have an issue with that. And in spot number 1, we still have the same guy as well. Raven. Raven is being looked at. He's got his first nerf. Sunder in this upgrade form got a nerf as well, so that kind of indirectly affects him. But neither is really enough to take him away from the spot that he's in my opinion. That little bit less damage reduction, that little bit less damage should not really take away from him being a strong bully in early game, high early game kill potential with a better transition into his late game that now shows a lot of potential as well, due to the damage reduction and due to what he can do to a target that he actually lands his ultimate on. So in the end, for him everything stays pretty much the same, and I do think that he will need further nerfs to drop from that throne. This is my top 5 list for the current patch 4.8. Obviously, I know there will be differing opinions on this. Again, I can only emphasize that a lot of this was done based on statistical evidence and not just gut feeling. But if you think that something is completely off, feel free to post that in the comments down below. With that, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was informative. I hope this was insightful. If you enjoyed this, feel free to click that sub button and maybe the bell if you like to. It really helps me out. Also, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Keyboard the Narwhal. I have been looking at his stats a little bit and I think it's a very interesting overview and it helped me a little bit with this video as well. See you for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.